gently. That actually leads into our next presenter. You know, what's great about this next product is it talks a lot about protecting our merchants, but it also goes back to that additional revenue stream we're all looking for. And the more we looked into this as a board, the more it said we have to bring this to our members. And we even created a little brochure here. They did. They happen to be local. We invited them to our conference. We're going to introduce them here in a second. But if you just look at some of the bullet points in here, you know, I do breach insurance automatically on my merchants for thesis. You know, it's like $7, and I think I get a rev share maybe. And so it covers up to $100,000. But I don't know much about what it covers. When I look at this, chargeback or fraudulent, like if they're not doing EMV yet and they swipe it and they get these fraudulent charges that they get it reimbursed. Now, I don't know the details. I'm going to have Ben, one of the principals, talk to you about this program. What you know you can charge for this. So you get. It's a way to make money and at the same time protect your merchant. It's supplemental insurance. And the nice thing is it doesn't show up on their statement, I don't think. It's not through TSYS or First Data, one of our processors. So this isn't going to show up where it's going to hurt you competitively. It's just a great way to add-on tool that the merchant, you're protecting the merchant for whatever dollar amount, they're going to want this. Think about restaurants that have these, that are still swiping and having these fraudulent and not having the EMV and some others. But I don't want to take your wind, Ben. Let's give him a hand. Come on up and tell us some more about this new innovative idea here. Where's the handheld? Did Hunter take that now? Oh, here it is. You can use it. All right, welcome.
Thank you guys very much. Nice to be here. Took a red-eye flight from Puerto Rico this morning. 3 hours sleep. I'm doing well. So, great introduction for me. I really appreciate you guys' time too. I'm going to jump right in, just so we have time, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions, is my bet. So let's jump right in. So, as Dennis mentioned, we do have a new partnership with CoCard, specifically for the chargeback reimbursement and merchant data security, which we're talking about today. So, who in here likes to make money?
Money.
Right? Who in here likes a competitive advantage over your competitors? Right? All no-brainers here. Who likes to give benefits to merchants that they can't go get on their own? Right? It makes us unique and different. And I can tell you this just from what we see with our ISO relationships around the country, is that everybody is moving from a generic to a specific. How do I get stickiness? How do I keep my customers happy? If I have enough services with this customer, they're going to need 5 companies to convert my merchant, right? So that's the idea behind this program. It took us 2 years to put this program together. We had over 3 million merchants worth of data to pull this off. So it was not an easy task, which leads us to this point. We have exclusivity on this program. There's nobody else in the world that can do this program. Because of that, you have an opportunity and a window, right? It won't be like that forever, I'm sure. But to start off, this is what we're talking about. Revenue, advantage for you, and benefits for your customers. So let's dive in. We call the program the Advantage Program. It's about merchant data security, which we just had a little bit of talk about, and also chargeback reimbursement. So I'm going to start with chargeback reimbursement, because that's what everybody wants to hear about first. So jumping in, chargeback reimbursement, what we do is we reimburse the merchant for a chargeback. We're going to get into those details in a moment. Up to $250 per chargeback, or up to $1,000 per chargeback. The chargeback reimbursement is for fraud, for EMV liability shift, and for fallback. Those are our 3 reason codes. This is a card present merchant program currently, card not present, coming soon to a theater near you. Okay, so card present, if they have a fraud transaction, comes through the system, you're going to get a chargeback letter. That chargeback letter gets uploaded to our portal. That's all we need. Our team takes over from there. Your merchant will get a check back within 30 days. So fraud, EMV liability shift. For those merchants that do not have an EMV terminal, doesn't matter. This program is designed to cover that. So what we saw was a major hole in the system from 2015 when this became an issue, when EMV liability shift started to happen. Card issuers have the ability to take advantage of a merchant. So let's say you have a customer that spent money at a merchant's place of business. Instead of using a chip, they swipe the card. The merchant doesn't have any idea what's going on, but the card issuer can see from their side, hey, they swiped this card instead of using a chip. Because of that, they have the ability to auto-charge that transaction back. The customer which paid for that service has no idea that this chargeback has happened. So what happens is the chargeback takes place, then your card issuer keeps the money from the merchant and still gets paid from the consumer. It's a bad hold.
That has happened to to a couple of my merchants, mostly restaurants. You're telling me that the card, the issuer,
Keeps the
doesn't
money.
even notify the card holder?
You're not required to. So this is the whole issue. This is why insurance became a possibility. So insurance is possible when there's a situation, I'll get right to you, when you have a situation where the customer has no ability to control what's going on in the transaction, right? Car accident, for example. If you cause a car accident, obviously your fault, you're not getting the insurance from the other provider, it's your fault, right? In this case, if a merchant can cause their own chargeback, such as product not as described, right? I can make my own chargebacks. I can just make a whole bunch of sales, never ship any products, right? That doesn't work, it can't ensure that. This is something where it can happen unbeknownst to even the merchant, and it creates an opportunity for an insurance policy, which is why we fought so hard for this. That was the number one reason, was for EMV liability shift. You had a question back here?
Yeah, I saw a lot of the issuer charging back the merchant property to chip and pocketing the money. Our holder doesn't know that. I saw a lot of that in
Correct.
2015 and 16, but I didn't see hardly any of that in 17, and I haven't seen any of that in 18.
It's,
I think it's because the banks realized there's going to be a class action lawsuit. They were in all kinds of trouble with that hidden ban.
100%. We waited for it before we fought for this. Go for it.
This is in effect on the EMV liability shift for customer-initiated chargeback as well?
Customer as well. So customer charges back for fraud, or fallback happens because they tried to use the chip, it didn't work, and then they swiped the card. So as we were talking about before, one of the ways that fraudsters will take money from a merchant is they'll destroy the chip, so they have to swipe the card, then they reprogram the mag stripe, just like we were just speaking about. And so when that happens, then that becomes a fallback transaction, still a chargeback. So that's something that's, again, out of the merchant's control. EMV liability shift, out of the merchant's control. And fraud is a customer, doing fraud on the merchant.
Not if they have, they say, for instance, they're a large-scale restaurant that has an old-school hard drive point of sale, and they have no EMV readers in place. I can sell them this product and
100%.
protect them against the chargeback liability.
You got it. So it does not matter if they have an EMV swiper or not. This will take care of that issue. Should you have those customers that are restaurants primarily? You've all seen those, right? You go to the restaurant, you can probably go here tonight, they're most likely going to swipe your card because restaurants hate the EMV chip. This is a primary target for restaurants, right? So this is what we did to put this together, is again getting enough data, 3 million merchants worth of data before underwriters. We had to get together. I'll just give you a little bit of backstory that you won't hear anywhere else. We did get a group of A-rated insurance companies to come together to back our program. No individual program, nobody would accept the program based on the risk and unknown of our industry, those type things. That's why it took 2 years and as much data as we had to get in order to get this pulled off. So we have a very, very strong backing because we have 3 A-rated providers backing our program. So let's keep going here. The other things that we also cover is chargeback fees. So you, again, bill your customer a chargeback fee. We want to make sure that merchant gets all their money back, not just for the transaction, but also what was billed by you. So with that chargeback fee, we also do that. So it means we need to collect that data when we're loading the merchants to the portal, so that we make sure we have that covered. Does anybody do ATMs? Okay, great, we got a handful. ATM customers are the same thing. Chargeback comes in a little bit different, but we do cover ATMs in the same light as a merchant. So a merchant account and ATMs can be covered. They each have their own policy. Foreign and domestic, does anybody do international? Not yet. Right? I think that's a big target for a lot of the processors today, is everybody's trying to figure out how do we integrate international. So I think you're going to see that on the horizon, but know that this program does work internationally as well. So breach protection, I want to talk about this for just a moment. I think everybody I talk to says, I know what breach protection is. So I want to dive in just a little bit and compare it to what we call our merchant data security program. So I'm going to get back to the basics. Breach protection in the beginning, right? Breach protection, and what our policy also includes, is a $100,000 policy is pretty much the standard in today's market. What it covers is card brand assessments, fines, fees, penalties, right? Next, we get PFI, PCI Forensics Investigation. If you've gone through a breach, your merchant receives a letter from the card brand. They have 48 hours to get a PFI on site. That is a minimum of $10,000. So once that person shows up on site, they're going to be there not to be the merchant's friend, but to audit them, right? They're trying to find out, did the breach happen from this merchant's location? So the PFI is covered under traditional policies. Notification costs, you're going to have to notify all the customers' cards that got stolen, right? That cost comes again from the merchant. Credit monitoring, they're going to need to give credit monitoring for at least a year for the merchant, for the customers' cards that got stolen. Cost to reissue the cards, again, at the expense of the merchant. QSA services, they're going to have to get a ROC done, or what's called a report on compliance by QSA. This is a traditional program. This is what we've all heard before, most likely. Here's what we haven't heard, most likely. Traditional policies have coverage limitations. So even though it's a $100,000 policy, you have $10,000 to replace equipment. You have $15,000 for your PFI. You have $25,000 for your QSA services. So do you really have $100,000? Or are you limited by what the policies are set up? So these are the things that happen, just like a general liability insurance policy that most of you in this room probably have. How many have read that general liability policy? This is my point, that we don't read these policies, so it's very important that we understand what they're covering. So these breach policies, everybody says they have, a lot of them self-fund those. Well, where's the actual policy? What do you actually cover? What are the events that take place that you get any coverage, right? So these things are very important for us, so this is why we focus on them. Next is exemptions. So there's a lot of industry exemptions. The very first policy I ever read said financial companies are exempt from their policy. Isn't that who we're all selling to, most likely? So you have to look at those details. What type of merchants are they? There's exempt merchants in these policies too. And also, who's the beneficiary? Who gets the money if the breach happens? Generally, that's the risk purchasing group or the processor. So you're at their mercy in order to fund your merchant. Okay? What our policies do differently, we give you full access to the $100,000. We don't care how much you spend on each line item of things that happen. If it's all happening on a data breach and you need $100,000 for that, you can use the full $100,000 there. We don't have any limitations whatsoever. When it comes to exemptions, we have no merchants that are exempt from our merchant data security. And the beneficiary, this is my favorite part, is the merchant. It's the merchant is the insured. It's the ISO also that's the insured. That's you. So let's dive into that just a little bit more. On merchant data security, here's some of the things that we add to these policies. So the things that make it super valuable to you. Regulatory. So regulatory is an up and coming. We've all heard about PCI breach for the last few years. It's been a really hot topic. Regulatory is coming next. And regulatory is, has anybody heard GDPR? Is that term ring a bell to anybody? Okay, GDPR or EU GDPR. This is the new regulatory for personal identifiable information. California just passed it. You're gonna keep seeing this a lot now too. So it's important that our policy covers this because we're covering fines, fees, assessments, penalties from HIPAA. If you do anything with medical, that's an important one to have. FTC, which is who enforces these, and GDPR. Post-breach chargebacks. If they get a chargeback because of a breach, we're covered. Legal consultations. These are expenses that aren't really thought of. If you have to do those notifications to all these customers, you got to come up with that money somewhere. That's why our policy covers that. Legal defense fees. If you get a regulatory breach, it's not the card brands coming after you, it's the FTC. So you're going to court. You need legal defense fees. So next, personal identifiable info, like we just talked about. So this is, let's say you have a customer that has a loyalty program. They're collecting a name, an address, a cell phone number. That's all personal identifiable info. That's PII. So they think it's harmless, but it is PII. It's considered private info. Personal health information, or PHI. Again, doctor's office, dental office, patient records, those type things. Again, we need to have coverage for these. Crisis management, public relations. When Target had their breach, they spent millions of dollars trying to rebuild their reputation so people know it's safe to shop here again. Your customer, if unfortunately they run into one of these events, will need that same thing. They're going to be able to use this money towards rebuilding their reputation. Equipment software, and that's spelled really well. I don't know if you see that. But equipment software, because this is one that I really like, we added to the policy. If you have a breach and your equipment is the cause, let's say the card brands tell you, hey, it's because your point of sale is storing cardholder data, you have to update that. Not that we want to encourage people to be negligent, but now their equipment and software can be used to update in that $100,000 policy. One more slide for this. Cyber extortion ransomware, which is my favorite. I'm going to come back to that. That's my highlight for you. Data restoration, restoring data in a data loss. ISO indemnity. This is also one of my favorites. We added this at the very end because we had some concerns. Well, hey, if I opt out and I do these things outside and my merchant goes poof, the processor is going to come after me. I'm worried because they make me sign some waiver, right? Those type things are covered because you have the same indemnity that the merchant has. Remember, you're the named insured on the policy as well as the merchant. So if the merchant goes poof, it's your $100,000 to deal with all these things that come in. That you won't find in any policy. Again, foreign and domestic. So I'm going to jump back to cyber extortion ransomware for just a moment. Cyber extortion ransomware, who's familiar? Great. More than half the room. This is something that's, again, an up and coming. It's an epidemic. It's not something that's happening rarely. It's often automated attacks. So the way that criminals use this system is to extort money out of businesses. It's an automated attack. So it's not some guy trying to hack into your system. They don't have time for that. They set up a system to do that. If your computer touches the internet, you're susceptible. So if they're able to get into your, just like we were talking about the passwords a moment ago, it's usually simple passwords is the way in the door. Once they're in the door, then they'll take over your computer, encrypt everything so you have no access to your data. If this happens to your merchant and they have personal identifiable info or a doctor's office, what do? They're stuck. They're not thinking about this. So this is why it's so important, because this is a hole that's in the market today. Average cyber extortion ransomware policy today costs $15,000 a year, and it usually has a $25,000 deductible. I don't know about you, that's very expensive. What I would think for an average small mom and pop shop, they're not going to pay for it because they don't want to pay 15 grand. So this is where the policy is most important. Everything else we've talked about is icing on the cake. If they could have a cyber extortion policy for a few $100s a year versus 15,000, is this not the best deal of the century for them? Zero deductible on the policy. So because of that, they don't pay any deductibles if they have a cyber attack. So even if you just sold this as a cyber extortion ransomware program and everything else was an add-in, this would be the best deal that they could ever get to have a policy protecting their business. So this is why I really want to come back to this. So this creates opportunity for revenue. Remember who likes revenue? Right? So last slide for me, and I'll be done, is the revenue. Revenues of this program range on 1,000 merchants. If you look up here in the corner, I think I have a pointer on here. Assumptions, 1,000 merchants. So if your portfolio is close to this, or if it's a multiple of 1,000, multiply the numbers. 12% attrition, 20 deals a month, 65% card present. This is what you're looking at on an annual basis of revenue on average for launching this program. $151,000, almost $152,000. Over a 2-year period, $330,000. Over an 8-year period, you're almost $1.7 million of additional revenue. So how many of you can take a portfolio today and raise the basis points to cover something like that without merchants getting upset? That's the opportunity, because there's not those opportunities. So this is a product that they find value in, that you make money in, number one, that you have competitive advantage in, number two, and the merchant gets something that they can't go and get on the street. That's why this program makes so much value. So you had a question back here?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Two questions. If this is an insurance product, do we have to be a licensed insurance agency to sell it? That's the first question.
Perfect.
The second one is, with all the potential expenses and costs, is $100,000 covered enough?
Perfect, I appreciate that. So first question was, I'll go to the second question first. Is $100,000 enough? Average breach that we see, as far as fines, fees, and penalties, is generally the cost of loss of product and generally the loss of point of sale having to be updated, because that's usually where most of the breaches happen on a traditional PCI breach. I would say you're looking at an average of $30,000 to $50,000 range. Average breach that you see with cyber extortion ranges from about $20,000 to $50,000. Generally, it's 1 Bitcoin per server is what these guys will charge. 60% of the time, we have to pay the ransomware to get their data back. 40% of the time, they have good backups, which is why we have backup data, our data restoration, so that our team can help them do that. So these are all covered in the policy without deductible. So again, the likelihood of them having all those things happen in 1 year, super unlikely, but at the same time, the $100,000 we feel is very efficient and enough to cover that. The first question he asked was, do I have to be an insurance company? It's the number one question I get. The reason that we do not is we call this an Advantage program. You can name your program whatever you would like to your customers, but we don't want to call it insurance. It's backed by a licensed broker of insurance. That's what we're able to say. But the program will have a name, and the value that they're getting is they're a merchant of yours, and they have access to a portal with these benefits. Because we all don't want to go and register to be insurance agents. That's exactly why. So our legal teams have done great detail of making sure that we do this right, and that's why you won't see that in the brochure called insurance or anything of that sort, just that the backing is there. Go ahead.
Quick note on the chargeback. They as long as it's one of the three layers it falls into or qualifies for, they get reimbursed for what the chargeback was and the chargeback fee.
Correct. Up to $250 or up to $1,000, whichever program you
But
put in.
not any of the retrieval fee or something like that.
Retrieval fee is considered chargeback fee, so that's also
So
covered.
they'll get retrieval fee and or
Up to the
chargeback
$250 or the $1,000.
per
Correct.
And you guys have, you're still gonna be here after?
We are. I'm sorry, I went over just a few.
No, that's okay, because there's some good questions here, this is a good product, and real quick, we have this set up through CoCard to make it
Yeah.
easier to facilitate, meaning the billing will flow through CoCard, right? So, did you and Ray work something out where it gets deducted? Was this one, or was I thinking of something else? Am I going big?
I believe it's ACH.
ACH?
Through your system.
Through our system?
Correct.
I think so, yeah.
Anyways, if you want details, who we talk to?
Jenny,
Jenny? Somehow we get set up so I can start selling this and how I get paid. I want to know how I get paid.
and also these flyers, they're made so you can put your
All right,
information.
so you'll be around afterwards and talk at the table. Good job. Hey.